Montana. Autumn 1952, the autumn sun hung low over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. On the weathered porch of an old ranch house, a man sat in a rocking chair, his white hair catching the fading light like fresh snow on pine branches. Jacob Crawford was 84 years old, and his hands still remembered how to hold a rifle steady. Beside him sat a young man in a crisp military uniform, the fabric still stiff and new. William Crawford, whom everyone called Billy, was 18 years old and shipping out to Korea in the morning. His grandfather could see the fear in his eyes, the way his fingers kept fidgeting with the buttons on his jacket. "Grandpa," Billy said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm scared." Jacob did not turn his head. He kept his gaze fixed on the distant mountains, on the peaks where snow already clung to the highest ridges, despite the autumn warmth in the valley below. "Fear is good," he said. "Only fools feel nothing before danger." "Were you ever scared? Really scared?" The old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached up to the wall beside him and lifted down an old revolver that hung there on a leather strap. It was a Colt single-action Army, the steel worn dark with age but still gleaming from careful maintenance. Jacob turned it over in his weathered hands, feeling the familiar weight of it. "This gun," he said slowly, "belonged to a man named Samuel Whitmore, your great-grandfather. Not by blood, mind you, but he was the man who taught me everything I know about being a man." Billy looked at the revolver, then back at his grandfather's lined face. "Tell me about him." Jacob nodded. His eyes grew distant, as if he were looking not at the mountains, but through them, back across 67 years to another time entirely. "It was the winter of 1885. I was 17 years old, and that was the night I learned what courage really means." The old man closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer now, touched with memory, and something that might have been grief or might have been gratitude. "The blood was still warm on my mother's lip when she heard the horses behind us." Montana Territory, December 1885. The blood was still warm on Ruth Ellen Crawford's lip when she heard the hoofbeats behind her, 6 children, 1 broken wagon, and Silas Hargrove's men closing in through the blizzard. She pulled 4-year-old Faith tighter against her chest and whispered the only prayer she had left. "Please, not my babies. Take me if you must, but not my babies." The wind screamed across the Montana plains like a wounded animal driving snow so thick that Ruth could barely see her own hand in front of her face. The temperature had dropped well below zero, cold enough to freeze exposed flesh in minutes. She knew they'd had perhaps 45 minutes before hypothermia became irreversible. Perhaps less for the little ones. Their wagon had broken 2 miles back. The rear axle had shattered against a hidden rock beneath the snow, the wooden wheels splintering into useless fragments. The horses had panicked at the sound, rearing and screaming, and before Ruth could grab the reins, they had bolted into the white darkness, taking with them the bags of food, the blankets, the last of William's tools. Everything they owned. Gone. Now they walked, or rather, they stumbled, 6 children and 1 woman fighting through snow that reached past their knees, wind that stole the breath from their lungs, cold that seeped into their bones like poison. "Mama." The voice came from her left, small and trembling. Luke, her youngest boy, 6 years old, with his father's stubborn chin and his mother's dark eyes. "Mama, I can't feel my feet." Ruth looked down at him. His boots, good leather boots that she had saved 3 months to buy, were soaked through. In this temperature, that meant frostbite within the hour, gangrene within the day, amputation within the week if he survived that long. She grabbed his hand. His fingers were ice. "You listen to me, Luke Crawford." Her voice came out harder than she intended, sharp as a whip crack. "You will feel your feet, and you will use them to walk. Because we are not dying out here. Not today." Behind her, Jacob was half carrying, half dragging Daniel through the drifts. At 17, her firstborn was trying so hard to be the man his father would have wanted him to be. His jaw was shaking so violently she could hear his teeth clicking together, but he did not complain, did not slow down, just kept moving, 1 foot in front of the other, his younger brother's arm draped over his shoulders. "Mama," Sarah's voice cut through the howling wind, 15 years old and already showing signs of the woman she would become if they survived this night. Mama. Grace fell again. Ruth spun around. Her 9-year-old daughter lay face down in the snow, motionless. "Grace." She shoved Faith into Sarah's arms and ran. Her legs screamed in protest. Her lungs burned with every breath. She dropped to her knees beside her daughter and rolled her over. Grace's eyes were closed. Her lips were blue. No, 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 no. Ruth slapped her daughter's face. Once, hard, then again. Wake up, Grace. Grace Ann Crawford, you wake up right now. Nothing. Wake up. Grace's eyes fluttered. Opened. But they were distant, unfocused, like she was looking at something far away that no one else could see. Mama, I'm tired. I just want to sleep for a little while. You sleep, you die. Ruth hauled her daughter upright, shook her until her teeth rattled. You understand me. You close your eyes out here. You do not open them again. Now move. She half dragged, half carried Grace forward. One step, another, another. The old Jacob's voice echoed through the years. I remember Mama's face in that moment. She wasn't crying, wasn't panicking. She just grabbed Grace and kept going. That was when I first understood what strength really looked like. Not big muscles or loud voices, just the refusal to stop moving no matter what. Sarah squinted through the driving snow, then suddenly pointed ahead. There's a light, Mama, look, a light. Ruth followed her daughter's gesture. For a moment, she saw nothing but white, an endless, frozen void that wanted to swallow them whole. Then yes, faint and flickering, barely visible through the storm, a yellow glow. That's where we're going. Ruth's voice came out stronger than she felt. Move. All of you, move. They made it another 100 yards before Ruth's legs gave out. She went down hard, Grace tumbling with her. The snow swallowed them both, cold and soft and almost gentle. Like a bed she could just sink into and never leave. Rest, something whispered in her mind. Just rest. You've done enough. Fought enough. You can let go now. Mama, Jacob's face appeared above her, young and terrified. So young. Had she ever been that young? Mama, get up. Please, please, get up. Take your sisters. Her voice came from somewhere far away, like it belonged to someone else. Take them to the light. I'll catch up. I ain't leaving you. Jacob grabbed her arm, pulled with all his strength. Sarah appeared on her other side, adding her weight to his. Between them, they hauled her upright. Daniel's got Luke. Faith's on his back. We just got to get to that light, Mama. It's right there. It's right there. Ruth looked at her children. 6 faces pale and frightened and frozen but alive. Still alive. She found her feet. Let's go. The ranch house materialized out of the blizzard like something from a dream. Solid timber walls thick as a man's arm. A stone chimney breathing smoke into the storm. A porch with a lamp burning in the window, warm and golden and more beautiful than anything Ruth had ever seen. She collapsed 10 feet from the steps. This time she could not get up. Could not move. Could not do anything but lie there in the snow and watch her children stumble past her toward the house. The door flew open. A man stood there. Enormous. That was the only word that fit. Tall as a pine tree, 6.5 feet at least. Shoulders wide enough to fill the doorframe. Hands like dinner plates, scarred and calloused. His face was half hidden by a dark beard shot through with gray, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds. For one terrible heartbeat, Ruth thought it was one of Silas's men. Thought they had been running toward death instead of away from it. Then the man moved. He vaulted off the porch barefoot, wearing nothing but trousers and a wool shirt despite the killing cold. He crossed to the children in 3 massive strides, scooped Faith from Daniel's back with one arm, and Luke with the other, lifting them as easily as if they were kittens. Inside. His voice was deep and rough, but there was something in it that Ruth had not expected. Something almost gentle, like distant thunder. All of you, now. My mama, Jacob started. I got her. Go. The children stumbled through the door into warmth. The man set Faith and Luke down by what must have been a fireplace, then turned and came back for Ruth. He knelt beside her in the snow. Up close, she could see his eyes clearly now, gray as iron and twice as hard. A scar ran down his left forearm, thick and pale against his weathered skin. Can you stand? She shook her head. Her body had given everything it had. There was nothing left. All right then. He lifted her. Later, Ruth would remember that moment with perfect clarity. 200 pounds of exhausted, frozen, beaten-down woman, and he lifted her like she weighed nothing at all, like a child lifting a doll. His arms were solid as oak beams beneath her, his chest warm against her side. She tried to speak, tried to warn him. Silas is coming. He'll kill anyone who helps us. Run while you can. But no words came out. Your children are safe. His voice rumbled through his chest. Save your strength. He carried her through the door into warmth so sudden it felt like pain. Her whole body seized nerves screaming as frozen flesh began to thaw. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was Faith's face watching from across the room. And her daughter was smiling, the silent man. She's waking up. The voice came from far away. An old woman's voice, kind and worn smooth by years. Get Mr. Whitmore. Footsteps. A door opening and closing. Ruth forced her eyes open. She was lying on a bed. A real bed with quilts and pillows and warmth she had forgotten existed. Firelight flickered on log walls. The smell of wood smoke and coffee filled the air. Easy now. The old woman's face appeared above her, gray hair pulled back in a bun, weathered skin the color of old leather, eyes sharp as needles despite her age. You're safe. Your young ones are safe. Don't try to move yet. Where? Broken Ridge Ranch, Samuel Whitmore's place about 2 miles south of Copper Bend. The woman pressed a cup of water to Ruth's lips. Drink slow. Ruth drank. The water hit her empty stomach, and she nearly vomited, but she forced it to stay down. My children. I need to see my children. They're fine, fed and warm and sleeping upstairs. All 6 of them safe as houses. 6. All 6. Something broke loose in Ruth's chins. A sob tore out of her, ugly and raw and animal. She pressed her hands to her face and wept. The old woman did not try to stop her, did not offer empty comfort or meaningless words. She just sat there with one weathered hand resting on Ruth's shoulder, letting her cry. The door opened. Heavy footsteps. The creak of floorboards under significant weight. She awake. That voice, deep and rough. The man who had carried her through the snow. Ruth scrubbed her face with her palms, tried to compose herself, failed. Give her a minute, Mr. Whitmore. The old woman stood. I'll make coffee. She left. The man Whitmore stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he crossed to the chair beside the bed and sat down. He was even bigger than she remembered. His face was weathered to leather, lined by sun and wind and years of hard work. His beard was neatly trimmed, mostly black, but going gray at the temples. His gray eyes watched her with an expression she could not read. He did not speak. Ruth waited for the questions. Who are you? What were you doing out there? Why were you running? They were the questions anyone would ask, the questions she had been dreading since she first saw his lamp through the storm. But the questions did not come. He just sat there patient as a mountain watching her with those storm-gray eyes. The silence stretched out. 1 minute, 2, 3. Finally, Ruth could not stand it anymore. You want to know why? Her voice came out rough, scraped raw by cold and exhaustion. Why a woman with 6 children was walking through a blizzard with no supplies, no horses, and blood on her face. He nodded, once. That was all. Silas Hargrove. The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Something flickered in Whitmore's eyes. His jaw tightened just a fraction, but Ruth saw it. You know the name, she said. Mining baron from Wyoming. Rich as sin, mean as a rattlesnake. His voice was flat, stating facts. Go on. He killed my husband. Silence. 18 months ago, made it look like an accident. Cave-in at the mine where Thomas went to deliver supplies. But it wasn't an accident. She waited for him to say something. He didn't. Just watched her waiting for the rest. William, my husband. He refused to sell our blacksmith shop to Silas. Refused to let Silas have access to me. The words tasted like ash. A week later, the mine collapsed. 30 men died, including William. But you don't believe it was an accident. The mine foreman Isaac Miller wrote me a letter after the funeral. Said he saw Silas arguing with William the day before it happened, and there was a drifter working at the mine that week. He disappeared right after the cave-in. I always thought Silas paid him to cause it, then silenced him. Whitmore's hands curled into fists on his knees, slowly, deliberately, then relaxed again. After William died, Silas came to me, told me I had 2 choices. Marry him or lose everything. My business, my home, my children. Ruth laughed a bitter, broken sound. He thought I'd be grateful, thought a widow with 6 mouths to feed would jump at the chance to be Mrs. Silas Hargrove. You said no. I said no 100 times, and every time I said it, he made my life a little worse. Spread rumors about me, made sure no one would hire me, bought the bank that held my mortgage. She closed her eyes. 3 weeks ago, he came to my house, told me he was done asking, said I would be his wife whether I wanted it or not, said if I refused again, he would take my children. He has judges in his pocket, could have me declared unfit, put my babies in an orphanage where I would never see them again. So you ran. I hit him with a cast iron skillet, grabbed my children, stole his wagon, and ran. She opened her eyes, met his gaze. He'll come looking for me, Mr. Whitmore. He'll come with men and guns and legal papers that look official. And when he finds out you helped me, she stopped. Her voice cracked. He'll destroy you the way he destroyed me, the way he destroyed William. She waited for him to tell her to leave, waited for him to say he wanted no part of this trouble, that she needed to take her children and go, that he was sorry, but he couldn't risk everything for a stranger. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "How many men does he have?" Ruth blinked. "What? Hargrove, how many men? How well armed? How soon can he get here?" "I don't. Why does that matter?" "It matters because I need to know what I'm dealing with." He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the darkness. "He's got money, got power, got the law on his side. That's bad." He turned back to face her. "But he's also a bully, and bullies only win when people are too scared to fight back." "Mr. Whitmore, Sam. Sam." Ruth pushed herself upright, ignoring the protest of her exhausted body. "You don't understand. This isn't some cattle dispute you can settle with your fists. Silas Hargrove is one of the richest men in the territory. He has judges, sheriffs, politicians. I've fought rich men before." His voice was quiet, hard. "I've killed men who thought money made them untouchable. Spent 3 years in the war doing it." He walked back to the chair, sat down again. "You know what I learned?" Ruth shook her head. "Every man bleeds the same. Don't matter how much gold he's got in his pocket. A bullet don't care if you're rich or poor." He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "Silas Hargrove put his hands on you, killed your husband, threatened your children. That makes him my enemy. And I don't run from my enemies, Mrs. Crawford." He paused. "I bury them." Ruth felt tears streaming down her face. She had not even realized she was crying. "Why?" The word came out strangled. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. Don't owe me nothing. Why would you risk?" "Because somebody should." Simple. Final. Like he was stating a fact no more remarkable than the weather. The old Jacob's voice drifted through the years. That was the first time I heard Sam say more than 3 sentences in a row. And one of the only times. He was a man who believed in actions, not words. But that night, Mama needed to hear it. And somehow he understood. The man who learned to stand. Ruth could not sleep that night. Even with her children safe upstairs, even with a fire crackling in the hearth and warm quilts pulled up to her chin, her mind would not stop racing. She found herself wandering down to the kitchen in the small hours drawn by a faint glow. Sam Whitmore sat at the table in the darkness, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, staring at nothing. "Couldn't sleep either," she asked from the doorway. "Never sleep much. Too many ghosts." She crossed to the table, sat down across from him. Moonlight came through the window painting, everything in shades of silver and shadow. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Your arm. That scar." She gestured toward his left forearm where the thick, white line ran from elbow to wrist. "From the war. Antietam, 1862, Confederate soldier, damn near took my arm off with a bayonet." "Did it hurt?" "Not at the time. Too much blood pumping, too much happening all at once." He looked down at the scar. "After, though, hurt for months." "The soldier who did it, did you kill him?" Sam's voice was flat, emotionless. "Yes." He offered no explanation, no justification, no remorse and no pride. Just the simple truth of what had happened. "I was 19 years old," he continued. "Felt older. War does that. Ages you in ways that don't show on the outside." "Is that why you came out here after the war?" Part of it, couldn't go home, too many memories, too many people who weren't there anymore. He took a sip of his coffee, came west looking for silence, found it here, built this place with my own hands, thought I could just disappear, become nobody, let the world forget about me. And then Mary. He went very still. Agnes told me, Ruth said softly. Your wife, I'm sorry. Mary was everything good in this world. His voice had changed, rougher now, like something was caught in his throat. City girl from Boston, delicate, didn't belong out here, but she followed me anyway because she loved me. He set his coffee cup down. I was too busy, too focused on building this place, too stupid to see she was suffering. The winters were too hard for her. The isolation wore her down. By the time I noticed, he stopped. It was too late, Ruth finished quietly. Consumption. Doctor said there was nothing he could have done, even if I'd brought her in earlier, but I've never been sure. Never stopped wondering if I could have saved her if I'd just been paying attention. Ruth understood something then, something important about the man sitting across from her in the darkness. You blame yourself. Every day. Sam, that wasn't your fault. Consumption isn't. Maybe not. He looked up, met her eyes. The moonlight turned his irises to silver. But I could have been there for her. Could have made her last months easier instead of leaving her alone while I worked the fields. Could have loved her better. He stood abruptly, walked to the window. After Mary died, I swore I'd never let that happen again. Never stand by while someone suffered when I had the power to help. That's why you're helping me, Ruth said. It was not a question. You showed up on my doorstep half dead with 6 children and more courage than anyone I've ever met. He turned to face her. You walked through a blizzard carrying a 4-year-old to save your kids. Hit a man twice your size with a skillet when he threatened them. You've been fighting alone for 3 years and you're still standing. His voice softened. That's not someone I can turn away, Mrs. Crawford. That's someone I have to help. The monster's shadow. The next morning, Ruth met with Sam in the barn while the children ate breakfast under Agnes's watchful eye. She needed to tell him everything about Silas Hargrove. Not just what the man had done, but who he was. What had made him into the monster he had become. I know some things about Hargrove, Ma'am said, as he brushed down a big roan gelding with slow, methodical strokes. Old stories. Might help to understand what we're dealing with. Tell me. 15 years ago, Silas Hargrove was nobody. Just another kid working the coal mines in Pennsylvania. No family, no money, no prospects. Wham's hands never stopped moving the brush, making long sweeps across the horse's flank. Then he met a girl, daughter of the mine owner. Pretty little thing, or so I've heard. Ruth felt something cold settle in her stomach. Hargrove thought she loved him, thought they were going to be married. Made plans, told people. Sam's jaw tightened. Then she announced her engagement to someone else. Son of a rival mine owner. Big wedding, whole town invited. Everyone except Silas. What happened? Wedding night, the bride's house burned down. Fire started in 3 places at once. No way it was an accident. The bride died, the groom died. The groom's entire family lost everything they had. Sam stopped brushing, turned to face her. Nobody could prove Hargrove did it, but a month later he bought what was left of both families' properties for pennies on the dollar. Built his empire on the ashes. Ruth's throat was dry. He murdered them because she chose someone else. That's the kind of man we're dealing with. He doesn't just want to win, he wants to own. And anyone who tells him no, anyone who takes something he thinks belongs to him, he destroys them. Completely. Sam's gray eyes were hard as flint. You're not the first woman he's done this to, Ruth. Just the first one who's still alive to fight back. The weight of it settled onto Ruth's shoulders like a physical thing. She was not just fighting for herself and her children. She was fighting a monster who had been killing and destroying for 15 years, who had never once been held accountable for his crimes. How do you beat someone like that? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Someone with that much power, that much money, that much. You find his weakness. Sam walked to the barn door, looked out at the snow-covered mountains. Every man has one, even Silas Hargrove. We just have to figure out what his is. The third night, the old Jacob's voice wove through the memory. That was the night everything changed. The night we learned just how far Silas Hargrove was willing to go, and the night I understood that Sam Whitmore wasn't just a rancher with a big heart. He was something else entirely. Ruth was in the kitchen with Agnes when she heard them. Hoofbeats, multiple horses coming fast. Her blood turned to ice. Sam, she was running before she knew she was moving, heart hammering against her ribs. Sam. He was already at the door, rifle in hand. In the moonlight, she could see his face had transformed. The quiet rancher was gone. In his place stood something older, harder, something that had survived 3 years of war and 7 men who needed killing. How many? Ruth's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. 5, maybe 6, coming from the south road. He pulled back the curtain an inch. Get the children. Take them to the root cellar. Don't come out until I tell you. Sam, let me. Now, Ruth. She ran upstairs. Jacob was already awake, standing in the hallway with a knife in his hand. His father's knife, the only thing of William's that Ruth had managed to save. I heard horses, he said. Is it him? Root cellar. All of you. Now. I can fight, Mama. I'm not a child anymore. Your job is to protect your brothers and sisters. Ruth grabbed his shoulders, forced him to meet her eyes. That's the most important fight there is. Do you understand? Something shifted in Jacob's face. The boy faded just a little, and she caught a glimpse of the man he would become. Yes, ma'am. Ruth watched him rouse the other children, heard them toward the stairs, then turned and ran him back down to the front of the house. Sam stood by the door, rifle raised. I told you to go with the children. I'm not hiding while you face him alone. He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Stay behind me. Don't speak unless I tell you to. The hoofbeats stopped. A voice rang out across the frozen yard. Whitmore, we know she's in there. Send her out and nobody gets hurt. Sam opened the door. Ruth saw them in the moonlight. 5 men on horseback armed with rifles and pistols. And at their heads sitting, his horse like he owned the world, was Silas Hargrove. He looked exactly as she remembered. Expensive coat, groomed beard, cold eyes that had haunted her nightmares for 3 years. Even in the freezing dark, she could smell his cologne. That sweet, cloying scent that she would associate with terror for the rest of her life. Mrs. Crawford, his voice was silk over steel. You've led me on quite a chase. Get off my land. Sam's voice was ice. I'll be happy to, just as soon as I collect what's mine. Ain't nothing here belongs to you. I beg to differ. Silas dismounted slow and casual. That woman is my fiancée. She stole property from me, fled across state lines with my future stepchildren. I'm simply here to bring her home. Ruth stepped forward. I ain't your fiancée. She was amazed at how steady her voice sounded. Never agreed to marry you, never signed nothing. You're a murderer and a liar. Careful. Silas's voice hardened. You're already facing charges of theft and assault. Don't add slander to the list. It ain't slander if it's true, Silas smiled. That same cold, empty smile she remembered. The smile that never ever reached his eyes. 5 men, Whitmore. 5 guns. 1 of you. He spread his hands. I'd reconsider my options if I were you. You'd be surprised what one man can do with the right motivation. Oh, I'm sure. Silas took a step forward. But here's the thing. Even if you kill all 5 of us, which you won't, there will be more. Next week, next month, for the rest of your life. He spread his hands. I'm a patient man, Whitmore. I can wait. Can you? Silence. The wind howled, snow swirled around them. Ruth stepped forward. She didn't know where the courage came from. Maybe from 3 years of fear, finally boiling over into something else. Maybe from seeing her children's faces when she told them they had to run again. Maybe just from being done. Completely, utterly done. Silas, he looked at her. That proprietary gaze she had come to hate. The one that said she was a thing to be owned, not a person to be respected. Yes, darling. You killed my husband. A tragic accident, everyone said so. You've spent 3 years terrorizing me, threatening my children, destroying my livelihood. A minor misunderstanding, easily resolved once you come home. Ruth took a deep breath. I'm not going anywhere with you. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Her voice shook, but it did not break. You can bring 50 men. You can bring 100. I will die before I let you touch me again. Silas's smile faded. For just a moment, she saw something else in his eyes, something raw and ugly and utterly inhuman. That, he said quietly, can be arranged. Sam's rifle cracked, but he hadn't aimed at Silas. He'd fired straight up into the sky. The sound echoed off the mountains like thunder. The horses spooked, stamping and screaming. Silas's men reached for their weapons, but before anyone could draw, lanterns appeared in the darkness. Ruth spun around. Men were emerging from the tree line. A dozen at first, then more, armed with rifles and shotguns and whatever else they could find. Ranch hands and shopkeepers and farmers, the people of Copper Bend. An old man stepped forward, white-bearded, weathered, carrying a double-barreled shotgun like he knew exactly how to use it. "Evening, Mr. Hargrove." His voice was mild but firm. "Name's Nathan Cole. I'm the sheriff in these parts." "Sheriff," Silas recovered quickly, his smile sliding back into place. "I'm here on legitimate business. This woman is under my protection, as is Mr. Whitmore and everyone on this property." Cole raised his shotgun slightly. "You've got some mighty impressive sounding claims, but last I checked, Montana territory ain't part of Wyoming. Your papers don't mean nothing here." "I'll have new papers drawn up. You'll leave tonight and you won't come back." Cole's voice hardened. "Unless you want to explain to these fine folks why a rich man needs 5 armed thugs to collect a widow and her children." Silas looked around, at the guns, at the faces, at the cold, silent judgment of 24 people who had clearly already made up their minds about him. "This isn't over." "No," Cole agreed. "I don't expect it is, but it's over for tonight. So unless you want to spend Christmas in my jail, I suggest you get on your horse and ride." For a long, terrible moment, Silas did not move. Then he turned to Ruth. The hatred in his eyes made her blood run cold. "You think these people can protect you?" His voice was barely above a whisper meant for her ears alone. "You think this rancher can keep you safe?" He mounted his horse, gathered his reins. "I will destroy every single one of them, and then I will come for you. And when I do—" He did not finish, just wheeled his horse and rode into the darkness, his men following. The townspeople watched until the hoofbeats faded. Then Cole turned to Sam. "Reckon you've got some explaining to do, Whitmore." Sam lowered his rifle. "Reckon I do." He glanced back at Ruth. She was trembling from head to foot, but she was still standing. Still standing. "Come on inside," Sam said quietly. "All of you, we've got a lot to talk about." The old man's memory. The old Jacob's voice returned, pulling the story back to that autumn porch in 1952. "That was the first time I saw the monster, but not the last. And what happened after that night? Billy, that's when I learned what it really means to fight. Not with fists or guns, with something harder. Something that takes longer. Something that costs more." Billy leaned forward in his chair, the shadows of evening stretching long across the porch. "What happened next, Grandpa?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, his weathered hands turning the old Colt over and over. "The townspeople came inside. We talked for hours, planned, prepared. Every one of those men had a story about Silas Hargrove, a sister who disappeared, a business that was destroyed, a friend who died in a convenient accident." He looked up at his grandson. "We weren't just fighting for Mama anymore. We were fighting for all of them, for everyone that monster had ever hurt. And we knew, all of us, that it was going to cost us, maybe everything." "Were you scared?" "Terrified." Jacob almost smiled. But Sam wasn't scared of anything. Or if he was, he never showed it. He just stood there like a mountain, solid and unshakable, and somehow that made the rest of us believe we could do it too. The old man set the Colt down in his lap. "That's what real leadership is, Billy. Not being the loudest voice or the strongest arm. It's being the one who stands steady when everyone else is shaking. The one who makes people believe they can do impossible things." He looked toward the mountains where the sun was just touching the peaks. "Sam Whitmore was that kind of man. And before that winter was over, he would teach me how to be one too." Billy shifted in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. The sun had dropped lower now, painting the sky in deeper shades of orange and red. His grandfather sat motionless, the Colt revolver resting in his lap, his eyes distant with memory. "What happened after Hargrove left that night?" Billy asked. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades. The townspeople came inside. 20 men, maybe more, crowding into Sam's kitchen like it was a war council, because that's exactly what it was. He looked down at the revolver. That night, I learned something important. I learned that evil men like Silas Hargrove don't just destroy one life at a time. They leave a trail of broken people behind them, stretching back years, decades even. And sometimes, if you're lucky, those broken people find each other, and they decide to stop being broken. The old man's hands tightened on the gun. That's what happened in Sam Whitmore's kitchen that December night. A bunch of broken people decided they had had enough. Montana Territory, December 1885. The kitchen of Broken Ridge Ranch had never held so many people. Bodies pressed against every wall, filled every chair, spilled out into the hallway. The air was thick with wood smoke and tension, and the smell of wet wool from coats hung by the fire to dry. Sheriff Nathan Cole sat at the head of the table, his shotgun resting across his knees. Around him stood the men of Copper Bend, ranchers with weathered faces and calloused hands, shopkeepers in worn vests and threadbare shirts. Tom Garrett, the blacksmith, his arms thick as oak branches, his face set in hard lines. Ruth stood by the stove, her children gathered around her. Jacob had positioned himself between his mother and the door, his father's knife still strapped to his belt. Sarah held Faith on her hip, the little girl's eyes wide and watchful. The younger children pressed close, silent and scared, but somehow understanding that this moment mattered. Sam stood at the window, rifle in hand, watching the darkness outside. He had not spoken since inviting everyone in, had not needed to. His presence alone seemed to anchor the room. Cole cleared his throat. "All right, Mrs. Crawford, the floor is yours." Ruth looked at the faces surrounding her, strangers all of them. Men she had never met, who owed her nothing, who had ridden through a blizzard in the middle of the night to stand with her against a monster. 3 years ago, she would have stammered, would have apologized for taking up space, for causing trouble, for being a burden, would have made herself small in the hope they would help her anyway. Not anymore. "My name is Ruth Ellen Crawford." Her voice came out steady, clear. "My husband was William Crawford, a blacksmith in Cheyenne, a good man, the best man I ever knew." She paused, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. 18 months ago, Silas Hargrove had him killed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cole held up a hand for silence. "Go on." "William refused to sell our shop to Hargrove, refused to let Hargrove have access to me." The words came easier now, flowing out of her like water from a broken dam. A week later, there was a cave-in at the mine where William had gone to deliver supplies. 30 men died. Everyone said it was an accident. She looked around the room. It wasn't an accident. The mine foreman Isaac Miller wrote me after the funeral. Said he saw Hargrove arguing with William the day before. Said there was a drifter working at the mine that week who disappeared right after the collapse. Said everyone knew the truth, but nobody was willing to say it out loud. Tom Garrett stepped forward. His face was hard as iron, his voice rough with old grief. "My sister Martha worked at one of Hargrove's mines 3 years back. She wrote me letters about what she saw there. Women going into his office crying. Men who crossed him disappearing in the night." He paused and something flickered in his eyes. Something raw and wounded. "She stopped writing 6 months later. Just stopped. I never found out what happened to her. Never found her body. Never found nothing." Another man stepped forward, thin and wiry with the look of a clerk or bookkeeper about him. Henry Doyle, Ruth would later learn, a man whose life Hargrove had destroyed without even trying. "I used to work for a freight company in Wyoming," he said. "Hargrove bought us out, fired everyone who wouldn't take a pay cut. When I tried to find other work, every door in the territory was closed, like someone had warned them all off." He looked at Ruth. "I know what it's like to have that man destroy your life, to watch everything you've built crumble because you had the bad luck to get in his way." One by one they spoke. Stories of businesses ruined, families torn apart, women who had vanished, men who had died in inconvenient accidents. The shadow of Silas Hargrove stretched further than Ruth had ever imagined, touching lives across 3 territories, leaving devastation in its wake. When the last man finished speaking, Cole set his coffee cup down with a decisive click. "Well, seems like we've got ourselves a situation." He looked around the room. Silas Hargrove thinks he can come into my territory and terrorize people, thinks he can buy judges and threaten witnesses and make everyone too scared to fight back. He stood his old bones creaking. I say we show him different. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but Henry Doyle raised a hand. How he's got money, lawyers, armed men. We're just farmers and shopkeepers. We're citizens, Cole cut in. We've got rights, we've got the law. The real law, not the bought and paid for kind, and we've got something Hargrove doesn't have. What's that? Cole smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Each other. The planning went on for hours. Cole would send word to the federal marshals in Helena requesting an investigation into Hargrove's activities. Doyle would compile documentation of every crime they could prove. Tom Garrett would organize the ranchers into a watch system, making sure someone was always keeping an eye on the roads. And Sam would protect Ruth and her children. No matter what. You understand what you're signing up for, Cole said quietly, pulling Sam aside as the others began to file out. Hargrove's not going to let this go. He'll come back with more men, maybe with legal papers from a Wyoming judge. Things could get ugly. Things are already ugly. Sam glanced across the room to where Ruth was talking with Agnes, her children clustered around her. That woman walked through a blizzard with 6 children to escape a monster. The least I can do is stand between her and him. Cole followed his gaze. A knowing look crossed his weathered face. It's like that is it. I don't know what it's like. Sam's voice was rough. I just know I'm not letting him touch her again. Fair enough. Cole clapped him on the shoulder. You need anything, send word. We'll come running. I know you will. The old Jacob's voice drifted through the years. That was the night I learned that community means something. Not just living near each other, not just knowing each other's names, but being willing to stand together when the darkness comes. Those men didn't have to help us. They chose to, and that choice made all the difference. Learning without words, a week passed, then 2. The children adapted faster than Ruth had dared to hope. The younger ones ran through the snow like wild things, their laughter echoing off the mountains. Daniel found Sam's small collection of books and spent hours reading by the fire. Grace and Luke explored every corner of the ranch, discovering hidden places and making them their own. But it was Jacob who changed the most. The old Jacob's voice returned softer now. I started following Sam around like a shadow. Not because he told me to. He never told anyone to do anything. But there was something about him, something that made you want to be near him, to watch him, to learn. Sam never asked Jacob to help, never invited him along. He simply went about his work, and Jacob followed, and somehow that was enough. The first morning, Sam went to repair a section of fence that had collapsed under the weight of the snow. Jacob followed, standing a few feet away, watching. Sam worked in silence, his big hands moving with surprising precision. When a post needed to be set, he dug the hole. When a rail needed to be nailed, he drove the spike home with 3 clean strokes. After an hour, he held out the hammer. Jacob took it, tried to drive a nail the way Sam had, missed, bent the nail, felt his face flush with embarrassment. Sam did not speak, did not criticize. He simply took Jacob's hand, adjusted the angle of the hammer, guided the motion. Then he stepped back and nodded. Jacob tried again. The nail went in clean. That was how he taught, the old Jacob remembered. Not with words, but with patience. With his hands showing me what his voice never said. He let me fail, let me try again. Let me figure things out for myself, and somehow that taught me more than any lecture ever could. The same pattern repeated with everything. Shoeing horses, mending tack, splitting wood. Sam would do, and Jacob would watch, and eventually Sam would hand over the tool and step back and let Jacob learn. One afternoon, Sam took Jacob to the far pasture where the horses grazed. A big roan mare had gotten a stone lodged in her hoof and was limping badly. Sam approached her slowly, speaking in a low voice that Jacob could barely hear, and within moments the mare was calm, letting him lift her hoof and examine it. Horses can feel fear, Sam said as he worked the stone free. It was one of the longest sentences Jacob had heard from him in days. You stay calm, they stay calm. You panic, they panic. He set the hoof down, straightened up, looked at Jacob. Same's true for people. That was all. No explanation, no elaboration. Just those few words, and then Sam was walking back toward the barn, and Jacob was following, turning the lesson over in his mind. But it was Faith who surprised everyone. The 4-year-old had barely spoken since they arrived at Broken Ridge. She followed Ruth everywhere, clinging to her mother's skirts, her eyes wide and watchful and far too old for her years. She flinched at loud noises, cried in her sleep, seemed to be waiting for something terrible to happen. Then one afternoon, while Sam was repairing the hen house, Faith wandered over. Ruth watched from the kitchen window, her heart in her throat. Sam was not exactly gentle, not exactly warm. He was a mountain of a man with killer's hands and eyes that had seen too much death. What could he possibly have to offer? A traumatized 4-year-old Faith stood beside him for a long moment, watching him work. Sam ignored her, or seemed to. But Ruth noticed that his movements had slowed, that he was being more careful than usual, that he was aware of the child even as he pretended not to be. Then Faith reached into her pocket and pulled out a flower. It was a tiny thing, yellow and wilted, one of the stubborn wildflowers that somehow survived under the snow. She must have found it that morning, must have been carrying it around all day, waiting for the right moment. She held it up to Sam. He stopped working, looked down at the flower, looked at the little girl with her huge eyes and her trembling lip and her desperate need for something she could not name. He did not say thank you, did not smile, did not do any of the things that other men might have done. He simply took the flower very gently and tucked it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. And Faith smiled. It was the first real smile Ruth had seen from her youngest daughter in months, maybe years. That was when I knew, the old Jacob said, knew that Sam wasn't just a man who could kill. He was a man who understood. Understood pain, understood fear, understood what it meant to be broken and trying to put yourself back together. He never said a word about it, never tried to explain. He just was what he was, and somehow that was exactly what we needed. The nights in the kitchen. Ruth found herself drawn to the kitchen in the late hours after the children were asleep and the house had gone quiet. And more often than not, Sam was there, sitting in the darkness with a cup of coffee, staring at the fire, saying nothing. At first, they did not talk. Ruth would pour herself a cup and sit across from him, and they would simply exist in the same space, two wounded people finding comfort in each other's presence. But gradually, words began to come. "Tell me about William," Sam said one night. Ruth was surprised. He had never asked about her husband before. Never asked about anything, really. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." She thought for a moment, tried to find the words. "He was kind, gentler than you'd expect from a blacksmith. Used to make little animals out of scrap iron for the children. Rabbits and birds and horses. The house was full of them." She smiled at the memory. "He sang while he worked. Couldn't carry a tune to save his life, but he sang anyway. Said it made the iron cooperate better." "Sounds like a good man." "He was. The best." Ruth's throat tightened. He never raised his voice, never raised his hand. Even when things were hard, even when we had nothing, he found ways to make us laugh. Made us feel like everything would be all right. She looked at Sam. "You remind me of him." "A little." Sam's eyebrows rose slightly, the closest thing to surprise she had seen from him. "Not in the obvious ways," she continued. "William was shorter than me, talked all the time, smiled at everyone. But underneath he was solid, steady, the kind of man who made you feel safe just by being there." She reached across the table, touched his hand. "You're like that, solid, steady, like no matter what happens, you'll still be standing." Sam was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I don't know how to be anything else. Tried being soft once. Tried being gentle. Didn't work out." "Mary," he nodded. "Tell me about her. If you want to." Another long silence. Then slowly the words began to come. "She was everything I wasn't. Bright, warm, full of life. When she walked into a room, everyone looked at her, everyone smiled. She had that effect on people." He stared into his coffee. "I met her in Boston after the war. I was trying to drink myself to death, and she was trying to save everyone she met. Somehow she decided I was worth saving. She was right. Maybe." He shrugged. "She followed me out here. Said she didn't care where we lived as long as we were together. But this place, it was too hard for her. Too cold. Too empty. She needed people, and there weren't any. Just me." His hands curled around the cup. I should have taken her somewhere else. Should have seen what it was doing to her. But I was so focused on building this place, proving I could do it, that I didn't notice she was fading away. Not until it was too late. Sam, the consumption took her fast. 3 months from the first cough to the end. I held her hand while she died. Told her I was sorry. Told her I loved her. Told her I should have been better. His voice broke just slightly. She said I was exactly what she needed, said the only thing she regretted was not having more time, and then she was gone. Ruth's eyes were wet. She squeezed his hand. She sounds wonderful. She was. Sam looked up, met her eyes. You remind me of her, a little. How? The way you fight, the way you refuse to give up no matter what. Mary was like that. She fought until the very end. Never complained, never blamed me, just kept fighting. He turned his hand over, laced his fingers through hers. You've been fighting alone for 3 years, Ruth. You don't have to anymore. The words hung in the air between them. Simple, quiet, but somehow more meaningful than any grand declaration could have been. Ruth felt something shift inside her. Something that had been frozen for a very long time beginning to thaw. Neither do you, she whispered. The wounded rider, the morning of the 10th day dawned gray and cold. Ruth was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the hoofbeats. Single horse moving fast but uneven. Her hands froze. Her heart stopped. Sam? He was already at the door, rifle in hand. They reached the yard together just as the horse stumbled to a halt, its rider slumping forward in the saddle. A woman, young, maybe 20 years old, dark hair matted with blood, face so bruised and swollen that her features were barely recognizable. Please, her voice was a croak. Please, I had nowhere else to go. She slid from the saddle and collapsed in the snow. Sam caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her as easily as he had lifted Ruth 2 weeks ago. They carried her inside, later on the settee by the fire. Agnes appeared with blankets and hot water. The woman's eyes fluttered open, brown eyes huge with terror. Please. Her hand found Ruth's, gripped with surprising strength. He said he was going to find me. Make me pay. Who? Ruth knelt beside her. Who did this to you? Silas. The name came out as a sob. Silas Hargrove. Ruth felt ice spread through her veins. You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you here. You believe me? The woman's face crumpled. No one believed me. They said I was lying, said I wanted money, said, shh. Ruth smoothed the hair back from the woman's forehead. I believe you. What's your name? Emma. Emma Winters. Doc Morrison arrived within the hour, examined Emma's injuries and shook his head grimly. Broken ribs, at least 3, maybe 4. Concussion, multiple contusions. He looked at Ruth. This girl rode 3 days with injuries that would put most men flat on their backs. I don't know how she's still alive. Fear, Ruth said quietly. Fear can make people do impossible things. When Emma was strong enough to speak, she told her story, and what she told them changed everything. I worked in Hargrove's house, maid, thought it was a good job, good pay, nice room, decent food. Her voice was hollow. Then one night he called me to his study, said he wanted to talk. I didn't think. She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. I tried to tell people, she continued, the sheriff, the pastor, anyone who would listen. They all said the same thing. Silas Hargrove is a respectable businessman. I must be confused. I must be lying. I must want money. Her hands clenched into fists. So I ran, stole a horse and ran, and I heard people talking in a town 2 days ago about a woman who was standing up to Hargrove, a woman who was living at a ranch called Broken Ridge. She looked at Ruth. I had to find you, had to warn you. Warn me about what? Emma's eyes burned with desperate intensity. He's coming. Silas is coming, and he's bringing an army. The room went cold. How many? Sam's voice was flat. 20 men, maybe more. Hired guns from Denver, outlaws from the territories. Men who will do anything for money. When 3 days, maybe 4. Emma's eyes found Ruth's. He's not coming to negotiate. He's coming to burn this place to the ground. Kill everyone inside. Make it look like a raid. Bandits, Indians, something no one can trace back to him. Ruth felt the blood drain from her face. My children. That's exactly why he's doing it. Emma's voice turned bitter. He told me before I escaped. Said he was going to make an example. Show everyone in the territory what happens when people defy Silas Hargrove. Silence fell over the room. Heavy. Suffocating. Then the door opened, and Henry Doyle walked in with snow on his shoulders and a leather satchel in his hands. I came as fast as I could when I heard, he said, and I brought something that might help. He crossed to the table, opened the satchel, and pulled out a stack of papers. Sworn testimony from Isaac Miller, the mine foreman. He's willing to testify about what he saw the day before William Crawford died. He set down another stack. Testimony from Agnes Whitmore, a woman Hargrove assaulted 5 years ago. She's been in hiding ever since, but when she heard what we were doing here, she came forward. More papers. 3 other women, all willing to tell their stories, and all willing to stand up in court and say what Silas Hargrove did to them. Ruth could not breathe. After all these years, after all the silence and the fear and the certainty that she was alone. And this, Doyle held up a single sheet of paper, his eyes gleaming. This is a letter from the territorial governor himself, authorizing the arrest of Silas Hargrove on charges of murder, assault, intimidation, and conspiracy. The governor, Cole's voice was incredulous. Turns out Hargrove has made enemies in high places. The governor has been looking for an excuse to move against him for years. Our documentation gave him exactly what he needed. Doyle set the letter on the table. There are federal marshals riding from Helena as we speak. 20 men fully armed. They'll be here in 4 days. But Hargrove will be here in 3, Sam said flatly. Yes. Doyle's face was grave. We have to hold him off until they arrive. Hold off 20 armed killers with 15 ranchers and a few shopkeepers. Cole shook his head. That's not a battle. That's a massacre. Not if we're smart about it. Sam walked to the window, stared out at the snow-covered landscape. Hargrove's expecting to catch us by surprise, expecting us to be helpless. He turned. What if we're not the decision? The plan came together quickly. The women and children would evacuate to the old mining camp up in the hills, defensible, hidden. Even if Hargrove's men found it, a few good shots could hold them off for days. The men would stay at the ranch, make a stand, let Hargrove think he had them cornered. Then show him what cornered animals could do. Jacob leads the evacuation, Sam said. It was not a suggestion. Jacob stepped forward. I want to stay and fight. Sam looked at him for a long moment, those gray eyes unreadable as always. Then, protecting your family is fighting, the most important fight there is. The old Jacob's voice drifted through the memory. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him I was a man, not a child, that I could handle a rifle as well as anyone. But there was something in the way he looked at me, not an order, a trust. He was giving me the most important job he had. And somehow that meant more than any battle ever could. Yes, sir, Jacob said. Ruth stepped forward. I'm staying. Every head in the room turned toward her. Mrs. Crawford, Cole began. No, listen to me. Her voice was steel. For 3 years I have been running, hiding, letting Silas Hargrove control my life even when he wasn't in the same room. That ends now. She looked at Sam. This started because of me, because I said no to a man who thought he owned me. If anyone is going to end it, it should be me. Ruth, Sam started. I'm not asking permission, Sam. I'm telling you how it's going to be. Sarah pushed forward, tears streaming down her face. Mama, no, what if you die? What if... Ruth cupped her daughter's face in her hands. Then you'll know she died fighting. I love you, Sarah. I love all of you more than my own life. That's why I have to do this. So you can grow up in a world where men like Silas Hargrove don't win, where little girls don't have to be afraid. I don't want you to be brave. Sarah was sobbing now. I want you to be alive. I know, baby, I know. Ruth pulled her close, held her tight. But sometimes being brave and being alive are the same thing, and I would rather die standing than live on my knees. She pulled back, wiped the tears from Sarah's face. Take care of your sisters. Help Jacob with the little ones. I'll see you when this is over. Promise. Ruth hesitated. She could not promise, could not make a vow she might not be able to keep. I'll do everything in my power to come back to you. That's all I can say. Sarah nodded, her lip trembling. Then she turned and ran upstairs. Sam appeared at Ruth's side. His hand found hers, squeezed. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. She looked up at him. This is my fight. These people are risking their lives because of me. I won't hide while they bleed. He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. All right then, let's get to work. The past night before the children left at dawn on the second day, Ruth stood on the porch and watched her babies climb into the wagon. Daniel with his book clutched to his chest, Grace holding her favorite doll, Luke trying so hard to be brave, his small jaw set in a determined line. Faith was the last to board. She ran back to Sam, threw her arms around his leg and held on tight. Come back, she whispered. Promise you'll come back. Sam knelt down, brought himself to her level. I promise. He kissed her forehead. Then he lifted her into the wagon and Agnes snapped the reins and they were gone, disappearing into the gray morning, heading for the safety of the hills. Ruth watched until she could not see them anymore. Then she turned, walked back inside and picked up a rifle. Teach me how to use this. Sam raised an eyebrow. You ever fired a gun before? William taught me, years ago, but I'm rusty. Then let's fix that. They spent the afternoon behind the barn. Ruth learned to load, aim, and fire. Her shoulders ached, her ears rang, but by sunset she could hit a target at 50 yards. Not bad, Sam admitted. I've got 6 children. You learn to be steady? He almost smiled, almost. I reckon you do. That night after the preparations were complete and the other men had found places to sleep, Ruth found Sam standing on the porch, alone staring at the stars. You should rest, she said. So should you. Can't sleep. Me neither. She moved to stand beside him. The night was cold but clear, the sky blazing with more stars than she had ever seen. Sam. Yeah. If something happens tomorrow, if things go wrong, they won't. But if they do, she turned to face him. I want you to know something. These past 2 weeks, they've meant more to me than you could possibly understand. You gave me hope when I had none, gave my children a home, gave me a reason to keep fighting. He was quiet for a long moment. I want to ask you something. Ask. Marry me. Ruth stopped breathing. Right now, tonight. Sam, I know the timing is wrong. I know we're in the middle of something terrible. I know we barely know each other. His voice was rough. But if I die tomorrow, I want to die as your husband. And if you die, he stopped, swallowed hard. I want you to die knowing someone loved you and your children with everything he had. Ruth stared at him. This impossible man, this mountain of silence and scars and carefully hidden gentleness. We've known each other 3 weeks. I know. I'm a widow with 6 children and a murderer hunting me. I know. You're insane. Probably. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Is that a no? Ruth thought of William, of how they had waited, been practical, done everything the right way. And then he had died and all that careful planning had meant nothing. She thought of her children safe in the hills, of the life she wanted for them, of the man standing before her offering her everything she had never dared to hope for. Yes, Sam blinked. Yes, I'll marry you, tonight, right now, if we can find someone to do it. Cole's a justice of the peace, then get him. Sam was out the door before she finished speaking. 20 minutes later, they stood in the kitchen of Broken Ridge Ranch. The fire crackled in the hearth. A dozen armed men stood witness, some grinning, some solemn, all of them understanding the weight of the moment. Sheriff Cole stood before them, a worn Bible in his hands. This is highly irregular, he muttered. Middle of the night, day before a battle. Just say the words, Nathan. Cole sighed. Do you, Samuel Abraham Whitmore, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Ruth Ellen Crawford, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Ruth looked at Sam. At his gray eyes soft now in the candlelight, at his scarred hands gentle as they held hers. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you man and wife. Cole closed the Bible. Kiss her quick, Whitmore. We've got a battle to fight. Sam kissed her. Not quick, not gentle. A kiss that promised everything, demanded everything, gave everything. When they finally broke apart, Ruth was crying and laughing at the same time. Mrs. Whitmore, Sam said softly. I like the sound of that. So do I. She touched his face. Now let's go kill the bastard who's been trying to destroy us. The old man's memory, the old Jacob's voice returned, pulling Billy back to the autumn porch in 1952. That was the night before everything changed, the night Mama became Mrs. Whitmore. The night I realized that love wasn't just about happiness and sunshine and easy times. Sometimes love means standing together in the darkness, knowing you might not see the dawn. Billy leaned forward. What happened the next morning, Grandpa? Jacob was quiet for a long moment. His weathered hands tightened on the Colt. Hell came to Broken Ridge, he said softly. 20 armed men riding out of the sunrise, and my mother standing at the window with a rifle in her hands, refusing to run. He looked at his grandson. That's when I learned what courage really means, Billy. Not the absence of fear, the decision to act anyway, to stand when every instinct tells you to flee, to fight when every odd says you'll lose. The old man's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Sam Whitmore taught me that, not with words, with his life. And your great-grandmother, Ruth, she was the bravest person I ever knew, because she had every reason to run, and she chose to stay. Billy swallowed hard. Did she survive? Jacob smiled, a sad, knowing smile. That's the next part of the story, son, and it's not an easy one to tell. He looked toward the mountains where the sun was beginning to set. But you need to hear it, because tomorrow you're going to war, and you need to know what you're capable of, what you come from, what runs in your blood. The old man straightened his shoulders. Are you ready? Billy nodded. Then let me tell you about the Battle of Broken Ridge, and the day your great-grandmother Ruth Ellen Whitmore became a warrior. Montana Territory. December 1885, dawn came cold and gray, the sun hidden behind a wall of clouds that stretched from horizon to horizon. Ruth stood at the upstairs window, rifle in hand, watching the tree line. Emma was beside her, pale and trembling, but determined, her own weapon clutched tight against her chest. Below, Sam and Sheriff Cole waited behind the barricades they had built through the night. Sandbags and flour sacks and overturned wagons, anything that might stop a bullet. The other men were spread throughout the property. Tom Garrett on the roof with his hunting rifle, Henry Doyle in the barn with a shotgun, a dozen others in trenches and behind fences, all of them waiting for the storm to break. There, Emma's voice was barely a whisper. There they are. Ruth followed her gaze. Riders were emerging from the tree line. 10 at first, then 15, then 20. More. They came in a loose formation, rifles and pistols gleaming in the pale morning light. And at their head, mounted on a magnificent black horse, was Silas Hargrove. He stopped at the edge of the property, surveying the ranch with cold satisfaction. Even from this distance, Ruth could see his smile, that same empty smile that had haunted her nightmares for 3 years. Whitmore, his voice echoed across the frozen ground. I know you're in there. Send out the woman, and I'll let the rest of you live. Silence from the ranch. You have 1 minute to comply. After that, my men will burn this place to ash and everyone in it. Ruth's hands tightened on her rifle. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. But her hands were steady. After everything she had been through, after 3 years of running and hiding and being afraid, her hands were finally steady. Sam's voice rang out from behind the barricade. Go to hell, Hargrove. Silas's smile widened. Have it your way. He raised his hand, and the world exploded. The Battle of Broken Ridge, the old Jacob's voice wove through the chaos. I was on the hill with my brothers and sisters when it started. We could see everything from up there. The smoke, the fire, the tiny figures moving through the snow, and I knew even from that distance that people I loved were dying. Silas's men charged with a roar, guns blazing. Bullets tore through the air, thudding into wood and stone and flesh. The defenders returned fire and men began to fall on both sides. Ruth sighted down her rifle, found a target. A man in a dirty coat running toward the house with a pistol in each hand. She squeezed the trigger. The kick slammed into her shoulder. The man screamed and went down, clutching his chest. She did not think about it, did not let herself feel it. Just found another target. Squeezed again. Another man fell. They're flanking, someone shouted from below. Coming around the barn. Sam was moving, barking orders, firing as he ran. 2 of Silas's men went down before they could reach cover. But there were too many. For every man who fell, two more took his place. The barn caught fire first. A torch thrown through the window, landing in the hay. Within minutes, flames were licking up the timber walls, black smoke billowing into the gray sky. The horses inside screamed in terror. "Get the horses out!" Tom Garrett yelled, abandoning his position on the roof to run toward the burning structure. "Tom, no!" Too late. A bullet caught the blacksmith in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard but kept crawling toward the barn, toward the screaming horses. Henry Doyle emerged from cover, grabbed Tom under the arms, started dragging him back. Another bullet kicked up snow at their feet. A third grazed Henry's arm, leaving a red streak. But they made it, both of them, bleeding and cursing, but alive. Ruth fired again and again. Her shoulder ached. Her ears rang. Spent casings littered the floor around her feet like brass snowflakes. Beside her, Emma was doing the same. The young woman's face was pale as death, but her hands did not shake. She fired with the methodical precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. "We're being overrun." Cole's voice rose above the chaos. "Fall back to the house." The defenders retreated, fighting every step. Men fell on both sides. The snow was stained red in a dozen places. And through it all, Silas Hargrove sat on his horse at the edge of the battle, watching with cold satisfaction. Like a man observing a play performed for his entertainment. Ruth found him in her sights. Her finger tightened on the trigger. A scream from behind her. She spun around. One of Silas's men had gotten inside. He must have climbed through a back window while they were focused on the front. A big man with yellow teeth and a knife in his hand. He had Emma by the hair, the blade pressed against her throat. "Drop the gun, woman." His voice was a growl. "Or I open her up right here." Ruth's mind raced. If she shot him, he might cut Emma's throat before he fell. If she dropped the gun, they were both dead anyway. "I said drop it." "Okay." Ruth lowered the rifle slowly. "Okay, just don't hurt her." The man grinned. Yellow teeth, broken nose breath that stank of whiskey and rot. "Mr. Hargrove's gonna be real pleased. Said he wanted you alive. Didn't say nothing about comfortable, though." He shoved Emma aside and lunged for Ruth. She shot him in the chest. He looked down at the spreading red stain with something like surprise. Then his knees buckled, and he collapsed at her feet. Ruth stood over him, the rifle still smoking, her hands finally trembling. She had killed a man. Watched the life drain out of his eyes. Watched him go from a living, breathing person to a piece of dead meat on the floor. She waited for the horror to come. The guilt. The revulsion. It did not come. All she felt was cold, fierce satisfaction. The old Jacob's voice returned. "That was the moment I understood something about Mama. About all of us, really. We're not born knowing how to kill. But when someone threatens the people we love, when it's them or us, when there's no other choice, we find out what we're capable of. And sometimes what we're capable of is terrible and necessary." Ruth turned back to the window, searching for Silas in her sights. But he was gone. His horse stood riderless at the tree line. Where? The door behind her burst open. The monster unmasked, Silas Hargrove stood in the doorway, a pistol in his hand. His expensive coat was splattered with blood that was not his own. His groomed beard was disheveled. And his eyes were no longer cold and controlled. They were wild, hungry, the eyes of something that had stopped pretending to be human. "Hello, Ruth." His voice was silk over steel. "Did you really think you could escape me?" Ruth raised her rifle. Silas was faster. The pistol barked and pain exploded through her shoulder. White-hot agony that stole the breath from her lungs. The rifle clattered to the floor. "Now then." Silas stepped closer, stepping over Emma's unconscious form. The younger woman had hit her head when the intruder threw her aside. "Let's have a conversation about respect." Ruth pressed her hand against the wound, felt hot blood seeping through her fingers. The bullet had gone through the meat of her shoulder, missing the bone. Painful, but not fatal. Not immediately, anyway. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Ruth." Silas's voice was conversational, almost pleasant, like they were discussing the weather over tea. 3 years of trouble. Do you have any idea how much money I've spent tracking you down? How many favors I've called in? How many men I've had to hire?" "Not enough, apparently." The words came through gritted teeth. "You're still not going to win." Silas laughed, that cold, empty laugh she remembered from her nightmares. Look around you. Your ranch is burning. Your defenders are dying. Your precious rancher is probably already dead. He crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. I've already won, Ruth. I won the moment you ran. Everything since then has just been cleanup. He reached out, traced a finger down her cheek. His touch made her skin crawl. You belonged to me the moment I laid eyes on you. Your husband knew it. That's why he had to die. And you've known it too deep down. That's why you've been running. Ruth gathered what strength she had left and spat in his face. Silas went very still. He wiped the spittle from his cheek with slow, deliberate movements. When he looked at her again, the mask was gone. There was no more charm, no more smooth words, just the monster underneath, raw and ugly and utterly inhuman. That, he said quietly, was a mistake. He raised his pistol, aimed it at her head. Say hello to your husband for me. The window behind him exploded inward. Sam Whitmore came through in a shower of glass, tackling Silas to the floor. The pistol went off, the bullet burying itself in the ceiling. The two men rolled, grappling for the weapon. Ruth scrambled for her rifle, her wounded shoulders screaming in protest. Her fingers closed around the barrel. She dragged it toward her, fumbled for the trigger. Sam and Silas were a blur of fists and fury. Sam was bigger, stronger, but Silas fought dirty. He gouged at Sam's eyes, bit his arm, drove a knee into his groin. Sam grunted in pain, his grip loosening for just a second. Silas twisted free, raised the pistol. Ruth fired. The bullet took Silas in the leg. He screamed a high, inhuman sound, and the pistol flew from his hand. Sam was on him in an instant, his massive hands closing around Silas's throat. You're done, Hargrove. Sam's voice was a growl, but barely recognizable. Done hurting people. Done terrorizing women. Done. Silas's face was turning purple. His hands clawed uselessly at Sam's wrists. Kill me, he gasped, and you'll hang. Maybe, but you'll still be dead. Sam's hands tightened. Silas's eyes bulged. Ruth's voice cracked like a whip. Don't. Umo's hands kept squeezing. Silas was choking, dying. Sam, please. Look at me. Slowly, Sam turned his head. His gray eyes were wild, unfocused, lost in some dark place she could not follow. If you kill him, they win. His lawyers, his judges, his bought politicians. They'll call it murder. They'll take you away from me. Ruth dragged herself closer, her wounded shoulder leaving a trail of blood on the floor. I just married you, Samuel Whitmore. I am not losing you now. Not to him, not to this. Something shifted in Sam's face. The wildness faded, replaced by something softer, sadder. His hands loosened. Silas sucked in that a ragged breath, coughing and wheezing. Tie him up, Ruth said. Let the law deal with him. The law, Silas croaked, is mine. I'll be out of jail before. Sam's fist connected with his jaw. Silas's head snapped back and he went limp. He talks too much, Sam muttered. Despite everything, Ruth laughed. It came out thin and broken, but it was still a laugh. You're bleeding. Sam was at her side in an instant, his hands gentle as they examined her shoulder. Bullet went clean through. That's good. But you've lost a lot of blood. I noticed. We need to get you to a doctor. First we need to win this fight. As if in answer, a shout went up from outside. Riders, riders coming from the north. Ruth's heart seized. More of Silas's men. Sam crossed to the shattered window, looked out, and his face transformed. It's the marshals. His voice was thick with something that might have been relief, might have been joy. The federal marshals from Helena. They came. They actually came. Victory. The old Jacob's voice returned. I saw them from the hill. 20 men in blue uniforms riding hard, the American flag flying at the head of the column. I had never seen anything more beautiful in my life. The federal marshals hit Silas's remaining men like a wave against sand. The hired guns, already demoralized by their leader's disappearance, broke and ran. Some were cut down, others threw their weapons to the ground and surrendered. Within an hour, it was over. Ruth sat on the porch, her shoulder wrapped in bandages, watching the marshals round up the survivors. Sam stood beside her, one hand resting on her uninjured shoulder. The touch was gentle, protective, the touch of a husband who had almost lost his wife. Mrs. Whitmore. She looked up. A tall man in a marshal's uniform stood before her, his badge gleaming in the morning light. I'm Deputy Marshal Thomas Kane. I have some questions about Silas Hargrove. I'll tell you everything. But first, she struggled to her feet. My children. I need to know my children are safe. Already sent men to bring them down from the mining camp. They should be here within the hour. The relief was so intense it nearly buckled her knees. Sam's arm came around her waist, steadying her. I've got you, he murmured. I'll always have you. I know. She leaned into him. I know you will. The children came racing across the yard like wild things. Jacob was in the lead, his long legs eating up the distance. Sarah came next, holding her skirts up to run faster. Daniel and Grace and Luke, all of them running, all of them crying. And Faith. Little Faith riding on Agnes's hip, her arms reaching out toward the porch. Mama, Mama. Ruth dropped to her knees, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, and caught as many of them as she could. Bodies collided with hers, small arms wrapped around her neck, tears soaked into her dress. You're hurt. Sarah's face was streaked with tears and dirt. Mama, there's blood. I'm fine, it's nothing, just a scratch. That ain't a scratch, that's a bullet hole. Jacob's voice was tight with fear and relief and something else, something that sounded like pride. Is it over? Luke was bouncing on his toes, too young to understand what had happened, but old enough to feel the tension. Did we win? Is the bad man gone? We won. Ruth pulled back, looked at each of her children in turn. Silas Hargrove is in custody. The federal marshals have him. He's never going to hurt anyone again. Promise? The question came from Faith, her youngest, her baby, looking up at her with eyes that had seen too much. I promise, sweetheart. It's over. We're safe. Faith nodded solemnly. Then she wriggled down from Agnes's hip and walked straight to Sam. Without hesitation, without fear, she wrapped her tiny arms around his leg and held on tight. Thank you for saving my mama. Sam looked down at the little girl clinging to him. For a moment, his face was unreadable. Then he knelt, bringing himself to her level. Thank you for letting me. Faith smiled, the first real smile Ruth had seen from her in months. Are you going to be my new papa now? The question hung in the air. The other children went still, their eyes darting between Sam and their mother. Sam looked up at Ruth. She nodded. If you'll have me, he said quietly. If all of you will have me. Yes. Luke launched himself at Sam, nearly knocking the big man over. Does this mean we get to stay? Does this mean this is our home now? This is your home for as long as you want it. Grace tugged on Ruth's sleeve. Mama, does this mean Mr. Sam is our papa now, for real? Ruth looked at Sam, surrounded by her children, his weathered face soft in a way she had never seen before. At Jacob, standing a little apart, watching with cautious hope. At Sarah, crying again but smiling through her tears. Yes, baby, for real. So we're a family, Grace pressed. A real family. Yeah. Ruth's voice was thick with tears. We're a real family. The trial. The old Jacob's voice carried across the years. I didn't go to the trial. I stayed home with my brothers and sisters while Mama and Sam went to Helena. But she told me about it afterward. Every word, every moment. And what I didn't hear from her, I read in the newspapers. 3 months later, Ruth Ellen Whitmore stood in a courtroom in Helena, surrounded by reporters and spectators, and the weight of 3 years of fear. Silas Hargrove sat at the defendant's table, flanked by expensive lawyers. He looked diminished somehow, smaller. The months in prison had cost him weight color, the air of invincibility he had always worn like armor. When his eyes found Ruth's across the courtroom, she did not look away. You do not own me, you never did, and after today, you never will. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Elizabeth Thorne, called Ruth to the stand. Mrs. Whitmore, can you tell the court how you first met the defendant? Ruth told them everything. The harassment, the escalation, William's murder, the 3 years of terror that followed, the threats against her children, the night she had finally fought back. When she finished, her voice was raw. Her cheeks were wet with tears she had not felt falling. Silas's lead lawyer rose for cross-examination. He was smooth-polished, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Mrs. Whitmore, you've painted quite a picture of my client. A monster, a murderer, a man who terrorized you for years. He smiled. But isn't it true that you were the one who initiated contact with Mr. Hargrove, that you sought out his attention? That is a lie. We have witnesses who will testify that you were seen leaving Mr. Hargrove's residence on multiple occasions, late at night, alone, because he forced me to come, threatened my children if I didn't. So you say, but isn't it possible that you're simply a scorned woman, a woman who expected Mr. Hargrove to leave his wife for you, and when he didn't? Silas Hargrove has never been married. The lawyer paused, blinked. I beg your pardon? He has never been married. He told everyone he was a widower, but that is another lie. I checked the records. There is no death certificate, no marriage license, no wife. Ruth's voice was steady now, all the fear burned away by cold, clean anger. Silas Hargrove is a liar. Everything he has told you, everything he has told this court is a lie, and I can prove it. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Witness after witness took the stand. Emma Winters, her voice shaking but clear, telling the world what Silas had done to her. Isaac Miller, the mine foreman, finally speaking the truth about William Crawford's death. Agnes Whitmore and two other women who had been terrorized into silence for years. Henry Doyle presented his documentation. Letters, financial records, a paper trail stretching back 15 years detailing every crime, every threat, every life Silas Hargrove had destroyed. By the final day, even Silas's expensive lawyers had stopped objecting. They sat in defeated silence watching their client's empire crumble. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Ruth's heart stopped. On the charge of assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty. On the charge of witness intimidation, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. 12 counts, 12 convictions. The judge sentenced Silas Hargrove to life in prison without possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led him away in chains, he passed within inches of Ruth, close enough to touch, close enough to kill if his hands had been free. This isn't over, he hissed. I'll find a way. No. Ruth's voice was quiet, absolute. You won't. You're done, Silas, and I'm free. She turned her back on him and walked out of the courtroom, into the sunlight, into her husband's arms. Behind her, Silas Hargrove screamed. She did not look back. 1 year later, the old Jacob's voice softened, warmed with the glow of better memories. Life at Broken Ridge wasn't easy after that. Running a ranch never is. But for the first time in years, it was peaceful. We worked hard. We laughed often. We healed slowly from the wounds we'd carried for so long. Spring came slow to Montana that year. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and stubborn green shoots pushing up through the mud. The creek behind Broken Ridge swelled with runoff, and the new horses they had bought to replace the ones lost in the fire grew restless in their stalls, eager to run. Ruth stood at the kitchen window, watching Sam teach Luke how to saddle a horse. Her son's small hands fumbled with the cinched strap, but Sam was patient, guiding him through each step without criticism, without impatience. Just steady presence and gentle correction. You're going to wear a hole in that floor. She turned. Jacob stood in the doorway, a cup of coffee in his hand. 18 years old now, broad-shouldered and tall. The boy was gone. In his place stood a young man with his father's stubborn jaw and his mother's determined eyes. I'm not pacing. You've been standing there for 20 minutes, shifting from foot to foot. Jacob almost smiled. That's pacing without moving. I'm just watching. You're worrying. He crossed to stand beside her. Though, about what? Ruth was quiet for a moment, then softly, I keep expecting to wake up. Keep expecting all of this to be a dream, and I'll open my eyes and we'll still be running through that blizzard. Jacob set down his coffee cup. This isn't a dream, Mama. Sam is real. This house is real. This family is real. He put his hand on her shoulder. Papa William would be proud of you. Proud of what you did to protect us. Proud of who you've become. Tears pricked Ruth's eyes. I still miss him. I know. So do I. Jacob's voice was gentle. But missing him doesn't mean we can't be happy now. Doesn't mean we can't love Sam. Papa would have wanted us to find peace, Mama. Would have wanted us to stop running. Ruth looked at her son, this young man who had carried his brothers and sisters through a blizzard, who had protected them in the hills while she fought for their future. who had become without her, quite noticing exactly the kind of man his father would have wanted him to be. "When did you get so wise?" Sam taught me. Jacob almost smiled. Not with words. He never uses words when actions will do. But I watched him, and I learned. What did you learn? That strength isn't about being the loudest or the biggest. It's about being steady when everyone else is shaking. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard. It's about loving people with your actions, not just your words. He looked out the window at Sam, who was now lifting Luke onto the horse's back, holding him steady while the boy found his balance. "That's what I want to be, Mama. That kind of man." Ruth pulled her son into a hug, not caring that he was taller than her now, not caring that he might think he was too old for such things. "You already are, baby. You already are." New life. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house had gone quiet, Ruth found Sam on the porch. He was staring at the stars as he often did, lost in thoughts he rarely shared. "Sam?" He turned, saw her face, and something in his expression shifted. "What is it?" "I need to tell you something." She crossed to him, took his hands in hers. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Sam went very still. "You're sure?" "Agnes confirmed it this morning." Silence. His face was unreadable in the starlight. "Sam, say something." "I never thought—" He stopped, started again. "After Mary died, I thought that part of my life was over. Thought I'd never have children of my own. Never be a father in that way." He looked down at their joined hands. "And now you're telling me—" "I'm telling you that you're going to be a father. Officially. Not just to my children, but to our child." His hands tightened on hers. "I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do. Ruth, you deserve every good thing, Samuel Whitmore. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you and your children and all the trouble that comes with you. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it. You already are." They stood there for a long time, holding each other under the Montana stars, two broken people who had somehow made each other whole. March 1887. The baby came on the first day of spring. A girl, perfect and squalling and absolutely beautiful. They named her Mary Rose, for the wife Sam had lost, for the new life growing from the ashes of the old. Ruth held her daughter in her arms, surrounded by her family. Sam stood beside the bed, his weathered face soft with wonder. Jacob, 19 now and preparing to take over his own section of the ranch, stood by the window with his arms crossed, trying to look grown up, but unable to hide his smile. Sarah was there with her husband Everett, the blacksmith's son, who had courted her with flowers and patience and gentle words. They had married the previous summer, and Sarah was already expecting a child of her own. Daniel sat in the corner with a notebook, scribbling furiously. He had discovered a passion for writing, and Ruth suspected this moment would find its way into one of his stories. Grace and Luke crowded around the bed, fighting to get the best view of their new sister. And Faith, 7 years old now, and no longer silent, climbed up beside her mother and peered at the baby with solemn eyes. "She's so small," Luke breathed. "She's so loud," Grace added. "She's perfect," Faith said firmly. "The most perfect baby ever." Sam sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Ruth, his other hand resting gently on Mary Rose's head. "Thank you," he murmured, "for everything. For this, for them, for us." Ruth leaned into him. "It wasn't me, it was us, all of us together." Outside, the snow was melting. The first green shoots were pushing through the brown earth. The mountains stood tall against the blue sky, eternal and unchanging. But inside the walls of Broken Ridge Ranch, everything had changed. A widow who had run through a blizzard with 6 children had found love. A man who had lived alone for 8 years had found a family. A monster who had terrorized half a territory had been brought to justice. And 7 children, 8 now, would grow up knowing what it meant to be safe, to be loved, to belong. Montana. Autumn 1952. The sun had set while Jacob talked, and now the porch was lit only by the glow from the windows and the brilliant canopy of stars overhead. Billy sat motionless in his chair, the old Colt heavy in his hands. "That's the story," Jacob said. "That's how Samuel Whitmore became your great-grandfather. How Ruth Ellen Crawford became Ruth Whitmore. How our family was born." Billy was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick. Sam, how long did he live? 78 years. Died in his sleep, Grandma Ruth beside him. She lived 3 more years after that. They're buried together on the hill overlooking the ranch. Jacob pointed toward the darkness, toward the ridge where 2 simple headstones stood side by side. She never stopped loving him. Even at the end, even when she could barely remember her own name, she remembered his. Samuel, she would say. Where's Samuel? And we would tell her he was waiting for her, and she would smile and close her eyes. Billy wiped at his face with the back of his hand. What about you, Grandpa? What happened to you? I stayed here. Ran the ranch after Sam got too old to work it. Married a girl from town, raised my own children, watched them grow up, and have children of their own. He smiled. Your father was born in the same room where Mary Rose was born. And you were born there too, Billy. This land is in your blood. This story is in your bones. Billy looked down at the Colt in his hands. Why are you telling me this now, tonight? Because tomorrow you're going to war, and you need to know what you're capable of, what you come from, what runs in your blood. Jacob leaned forward, his old eyes bright. You're going to be scared over there, Billy. You're going to see things that make you want to run, things that make you want to give up. And when those moments come, I want you to remember this story. Why? Because your great-grandmother Ruth was scared too. Scared for 3 years, scared every single day. But she kept going. She kept fighting. She refused to let a monster win. Jacob reached out, closed Billy's fingers around the Colt. And your great-grandfather Sam, he taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act anyway. To stand when everything in you wants to flee. To protect the people who need protecting, even when it costs you everything. He squeezed his grandson's hands. That's what you come from, Billy. That's who you are. Not some scared kid going off to a war he doesn't understand, but the great-grandson of Samuel Whitmore and Ruth Ellen Crawford, a descendant of people who stood when others ran, who fought when others surrendered, who loved when others hated. Billy's eyes were wet. I don't know if I can do this, Grandpa. Neither did they. Neither did your great-grandmother standing in that blizzard with 6 children, sure she was going to die. Neither did Sam facing down 20 armed men with nothing but a rifle and a handful of farmers. Jacob smiled. But they did it anyway, and so will you. He stood, bones creaking, and pulled his grandson to his feet. Take the gun. It's yours now. Sam would have wanted it. Billy looked at the Colt, at the worn steel polished smooth by decades of careful hands, at the history it represented. I'll bring it back. I know you will. They stood there for a moment, grandfather and grandson, past and future. Then Jacob pulled Billy into an embrace, held him tight. I love you, son. I'm proud of you. And whatever happens over there, whatever you have to do, remember this, you come from warriors, from survivors, from people who never gave up no matter what. He pulled back, looked Billy in the eye. Now go, and come home. Billy nodded, tucked the Colt into his bag, walked to the edge of the porch, then he stopped, turned back. Grandpa, yeah, the story you told me, how does it end? Really end, Jacob smiled, that sad, knowing smile of a man who has lived 84 years and seen both heaven and hell. It doesn't end, Billy. That's the whole point. It continues in you, in your children someday, in everyone who comes after. He looked toward the mountains where the first light of dawn was just beginning to touch the peaks. That's what legacy is. Not money or land or things you can hold in your hands. It's the stories we tell, the lessons we pass on, the love we leave behind. His voice softened. Samuel Whitmore and Ruth Crawford are gone, but they live on in this ranch, in this family, in the blood that runs through your veins. And when you have children of your own, and when they ask you about courage, about love, about what it means to be a good man, he smiled. You tell them this story, and it continues. Forever. Billy stood there for a long moment, the weight of history heavy on his shoulders. Then he straightened his spine, squared his shoulders, lifted his chin. Goodbye, Grandpa. Goodbye, Billy, and remember. I know. Billy almost smiled. Stand when others run. Fight when others surrender. Love when others hate. That's my boy. Billy walked off the porch into the waiting truck that would take him to the train station. At the edge of the yard, he turned and looked back one last time. Jacob stood on the porch, silhouetted against the light from the windows, old and weathered and unbowed. The last living link to a story that had begun in a blizzard 70 years ago. Billy raised his hand in farewell. Jacob raised his in return. Then Billy was gone, disappearing down the road, heading toward a war on the other side of the world. Jacob watched until the taillights faded into the darkness. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small dried flower. Yellow faded almost to brown. The flower that Faith had given to some all those years ago. He had found it in Sam's pocket the day the old man died. Had kept it ever since. A reminder of what love looked like. What family meant. What legacy truly was. "He'll be okay," he whispered to the night. To the mountains. To the graves on the hill. "He's one of us." And somewhere in the darkness, he could almost hear Sam's voice. Low and rough, but somehow gentle, like distant thunder. "They always are." Jacob smiled, tucked the flower back into his pocket, and went inside to wait for his grandson to come home. Because that was what family did. They waited. They hoped. They loved. And they never ever gave up.